Most of the time, when we think about the American Civil Rights Movement, we picture peaceful marches, stirring speeches about dreams, and the moral power of nonviolence. But there was another voice in that era, a voice that refused to beg for rights, that rejected the idea of turning the other cheek, that declared self-defense a fundamental human right. His name was Malcolm Little, but the world would come to know him by many names: Detroit Red, Malcolm X, and finally, El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz. His life wasn't a simple story of heroism or villainy. It was a story of constant transformation, of a man who rebuilt himself again and again, from street hustler to religious minister to international human rights advocate. And at the heart of his journey was a pilgrimage that would shatter everything he thought he knew about race, religion, and revolution. Welcome to Muslim Biographies, where we uncover the forgotten giants of Islamic history whose contributions shaped our world. Malcolm Little was born on May 19, 1925 in Omaha, Nebraska, the fourth of 7 children. His parents, Earl and Louise Little, weren't ordinary working-class black Americans trying to survive in a racist society. They were activists. Earl Little served as the Omaha chapter president. Louise acted as division secretary. Their household wasn't just about survival. It was about dignity, pride, and the radical vision of African Americans returning to their ancestral homeland. But dignity had a price. In the 1920s, America, the Ku Klux Klan, didn't appreciate black families preaching self-determination. In late 1926, after Klan members terrorized their home, the Littles fled Omaha. They tried Milwaukee briefly, then settled in Lansing, Michigan in 1928, hoping for stability. They attempted to buy a home in the white neighborhood of Westmont, near Grand River Avenue. The response was swift and brutal. Legal eviction notices came first, citing restrictive covenants that barred black ownership. When that didn't work quickly enough, arsonists took matters into their own hands. On November the 7th, 1928, the family's home at 3230 Alfred Avenue burned to the ground. Young Malcolm, just 3 years old, watched his home consumed by flames. And here's the detail that captures the moral bankruptcy of that era. No fire engines came. The authorities simply let it burn. The message was clear. Black families didn't belong in white neighborhoods, and the law wouldn't protect them. But Earl Little wasn't easily intimidated. He moved his family and built a new home himself at 4705 Logan Street, which still stands today as a historical site. For 2 years, the family found some measure of stability. Then in 1931, everything collapsed. Earl Little was found dead on streetcar tracks. The police ruled it an accident. The family knew better. They believed he'd been killed by the Black Legion, a white supremacist organization even more violent than the Klan. Louise Little tried desperately to hold the family together during the Great Depression, but the combination of poverty, grief, and constant interference from welfare authorities who questioned her competence as a parent proved overwhelming. By 1939, she suffered a psychological crisis and was committed to Kalamazoo State Hospital, where she would remain for 26 years. The children were scattered among foster homes. Malcolm ended up in the Michigan State Detention Home in Mason, under the care of a white couple named the Swerlins. Here's where Malcolm's story takes a turn that millions of black Americans will recognize. The moment when the system reveals it never intended to let you succeed. Malcolm was an excellent student. He was elected class president. He had dreams, ambitions, a sharp mind, hungry for knowledge. One day he told his teacher, Mr. Ostrowski, that he wanted to become a lawyer. The teacher's response: "That's not a realistic goal for someone like you. You should think about carpentry." Think about that moment. A child already orphaned, already displaced, already traumatized, reaches for the one thing that might save him: education, achievement, a legitimate path forward. And his teacher crushes it with a single sentence. Malcolm would later say that this rejection triggered his withdrawal from the system entirely. If America wouldn't let him succeed legitimately, he'd find another way. In February 1941, 15-year-old Malcolm moved to Boston's Roxbury neighborhood to live with his half-sister, Ella Collins. Ella was a strong, independent woman who tried to integrate Malcolm into Boston's black middle class. But Malcolm was mesmerized by something else entirely: the vibrant, dangerous energy of urban nightlife. He adopted the zoot suit style, popular among young black men. He dyed his hair, earning the nickname Detroit Red. He worked shoeshine stands, restaurants, railroad jobs, whatever paid. But increasingly, his real life happened after dark. The move to New York City's Harlem completed his transformation into what the streets called a hustler. Malcolm became involved in illegal activities, dealing substances, running numbers, and operating in the shadow economy of the ghetto. This wasn't rebellion for rebellion's sake. It was a rational response to systemic exclusion. The legitimate world had told him he couldn't be a lawyer. Fine, he'd be something else. He'd find status, respect, and money in the only economy that would have him. It couldn't last. In January 1946, at age 20, Malcolm was arrested trying to retrieve a stolen watch worth $1,000 from a pawn shop. The sentence was harsh: 8 to 10 years for grand larceny and breaking and entering. He was assigned prisoner number 22,843 at Charlestown Prison. He was 20 years old, angry at the world, and completely certain that his life was over. He was wrong. Prison would become the most transformative period of his life. Initially, Malcolm was known among inmates as Satan because of his loud, aggressive atheism and his hatred of all religion. But prison introduced him to a man named John Bembry, called Bimby in Malcolm's autobiography. Bembry was self-educated, articulate, commanding respect through the power of his knowledge and speech, rather than physical intimidation. Bembry made Malcolm realize something humiliating. Despite all his street intelligence, Malcolm's actual vocabulary was maybe 200 words. He couldn't express complex thoughts. His letters to family and friends were crude, limited, inadequate. He was intellectually still a child. So Malcolm did something extraordinary. He requested a dictionary from the prison library, and then he began copying it, word by word, definition by definition, punctuation marks included. He started with aardvark and worked his way through the entire alphabet. It took months. His handwriting improved. His vocabulary exploded. Words became tools, weapons, keys to understanding the world. But the dictionary was just the beginning. In 1948, Malcolm was transferred to Norfolk Prison Colony, an experimental facility with a well-stocked library. Here he discovered books, real books, history, philosophy, religion, politics. He read W.E.B. Du Bois and understood the black struggle in America as part of a global pattern of oppression. He read Herodotus and saw how ancient empires justified slavery and conquest. He read Hegel, Kant, and Nietzsche, learning how Western philosophers had constructed hierarchies that placed white Europeans at the top and everyone else beneath them. Malcolm later called Norfolk Prison Colony his alma mater. He said he read more intensively there than he ever could have at any university. He would read until 3 or 4 in the morning, using the dim hallway light after the guards passed by his cell. He joined the Prison Debating Society, honing the public speaking skills that would later make him one of the most electrifying orators in American history. But the most profound transformation came through religion. Malcolm's siblings began writing to him about the Nation of Islam, a black religious movement led by a man named Elijah Muhammad. The Nation's theology was unorthodox. It taught that white people were literally devils created by an evil scientist, that black people were the original humans, that separation rather than integration was the answer to racism in America. For Malcolm, sitting in a prison cell because white society had rejected his legitimate aspirations and criminalized his survival strategies, this message made perfect sense. It explained everything: the killing of his father, the destruction of his mother, the burning of his home, his teachers' casual cruelty. The Nation of Islam gave him a framework to understand his suffering, not as personal failure, but as systemic oppression. His conversion was total. He stopped eating pork, gambling, smoking. He adopted a strict moral code. He later said the hardest test he ever faced was the humility required to bend his knees in prayer, noting that before his conversion, his knees had only ever bent to pick a lock. When Malcolm was released on parole in August 1952, he was a different man. He replaced his surname Little, a name given to his ancestors by slaveholders, with an X representing the unknown African name stolen from his family. He visited Elijah Muhammad in Chicago and was quickly appointed an assistant minister. Malcolm X had found his purpose. What happened next was remarkable. Malcolm's charisma, intelligence, and tireless organizing transformed the Nation of Islam from a fringe group of a few hundred members into a national movement. Under his leadership as national representative, membership grew to nearly 40,000 active followers, with perhaps 500,000 more influenced by the movement's message. Malcolm established temples across the country: Detroit, Boston, Philadelphia, and most importantly, Temple No. 7 in Harlem, which became the nation's flagship under his direct leadership. He founded the newspaper Muhammad Speaks, initially printing it in his own basement. He appeared on television programs, debated academics, and became the public face of black nationalism in America. His message was provocative and uncompromising. While Martin Luther King Jr. preached integration and nonviolence, Malcolm preached separation and self-defense. We declare our right on this earth to be a man, to be a human being, to be respected as a human being, to be given the rights of a human being in this society, on this earth, in this day, which we intend to bring into existence by any means necessary. That phrase, by any means necessary, terrified white America and thrilled black Americans tired of turning the other cheek. But success brought complications. Malcolm's rising prominence created deep tensions within the Nation of Islam. Older members resented his influence. Elijah Muhammad's family saw him as a threat to their power. Malcolm wanted the nation actively involved in civil rights protests. Muhammad counseled non-engagement with the devil's politics. Then came the devastating personal betrayal. Malcolm discovered that Elijah Muhammad, the man he revered as a prophet, the man who preached strict sexual morality, had fathered children with 6 of his personal secretaries. The hypocrisy shattered Malcolm's faith in his mentor. The final break came in December 1963. President John F. Kennedy had been assassinated. Speaking to reporters, Malcolm said the event was a case of chickens coming home to roost, meaning that the violence America spread around the world through its foreign policy had returned home. The comment outraged the public. Elijah Muhammad used it as a pretext to silence Malcolm for 90 days. But Malcolm knew the silence was permanent. In March 1964, he officially left the Nation of Islam. He founded 2 new organizations, Muslim Mosque, Inc. as a religious entity, and the Organization of Afro-American Unity as a political movement. He was free, and he was in danger. In April 1964, Malcolm embarked on the Hajj, the Islamic pilgrimage to Mecca that every Muslim is required to make if physically and financially able. This wasn't just a religious obligation, it was a confrontation with everything he'd believed for 12 years. When Malcolm arrived at the Jeddah airport on April 12, 1964, Saudi officials seized his passport. They required him to appear before the Hajj court to verify he was a true Muslim, because the Nation of Islam's theology was so far from Orthodox Islam that Saudi authorities didn't recognize it as legitimate. Here Malcolm faced a humiliating truth. Despite being a famous minister in America, despite having converted thousands to Islam, he didn't know how to perform the basic Islamic prayer in Arabic. The Nation of Islam hadn't taught the actual practices of global Islam. He was, religiously, still a beginner. He was rescued by Dr. Omar Azam, a tall, powerfully built Egyptian whose father was a high-ranking official. Azam's hospitality and brotherhood challenged everything Malcolm had been taught about white people, because Dr. Azam, by American racial categories, was white, light-skinned, blue-eyed. Yet he treated Malcolm with genuine Islamic brotherhood, securing him a place as a guest of the state and even arranging a meeting with Prince Faisal. Then came the Hajj itself. Malcolm joined millions of Muslims from every nation, every race, every language, all dressed in simple white cloths, all equal before God. He performed the Tawaf, circling the Kaaba 7 times with pilgrims whose skin ranged from pale European white to the darkest African black. He ran between the hills of Al-Safa and Al-Marwa, retracing the steps of Hajar, the African mother of Ishmael. He stood on the plain of Arafat with 2 million people, all praying as one. The experience shattered his racial theology. On April 20th, 1964, he wrote a letter that would change the trajectory of his life and work. In his letter from Mecca, he wrote, "There were tens of thousands of pilgrims from all over the world. They were of all colors, from blue-eyed blondes to black-skinned Africans. But we were all participating in the same ritual, displaying a spirit of unity and brotherhood that my experiences in America had led me to believe never could exist between the white and non-white." He continued, "America needs to understand Islam, because this is the one religion that erases from its society the race problem. Throughout my travels in the Muslim world, I have met, talked to, and even eaten with people who in America will have been considered white, but the white attitude was removed from their minds by the religion of Islam." Malcolm X was dead. El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz was born. When Malik El-Shabazz returned to America, he was no longer a domestic community leader. He had become a global thinker. He declared that the struggle of African Americans wasn't merely a civil rights issue to be resolved through American courts and legislation. It was a human rights violation that belonged before the world court. His rhetoric shifted. He became less hostile toward other civil rights leaders, publicly stating that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. wants the same thing I want: freedom. He visited Selma, Alabama to support the voting rights campaign. He told Coretta Scott King that he hoped his militant presence would frighten white authorities into negotiating more favorably with her husband. But he never abandoned his core principle: self-defense was legitimate. The ballot or the bullet, he famously declared, meaning that if black Americans were denied the vote, they retained the right to defend themselves by any means necessary. The final months were shadowed by violence. His home was firebombed on February 14th, 1965. The FBI and CIA had him under constant surveillance. The Nation of Islam had declared him a traitor. Threats arrived daily. He told friends he didn't expect to live long. On February 21st, 1965, Malik El-Shabazz prepared to address an organization of Afro-American unity meeting at the Audubon Ballroom in Washington Heights. 400 people filled the hall. At approximately 3:15 p.m., as he stood at the podium, a disturbance erupted in the crowd when someone shouted to create chaos. As his bodyguards moved toward the disturbance, 3 men rushed the stage. The assassins opened fire. He fell fatally wounded. He was pronounced dead at Columbia Presbyterian Hospital at 3:30 p.m. He was 39 years old. The mainstream American media's response was callous. The New York Times editorial said he had used his true gifts to evil purpose. Jimmy Breslin of the New York Herald Tribune dismissed him as a shallow, uneducated guy who had been built into an illusion by white newspapermen hungry for controversy. But at his funeral at Faith Temple Church of God, the actor and activist Ossie Davis delivered a eulogy that captured what Malcolm meant to Black America. "Malcolm was our manhood, our living, black manhood. This was his meaning to his people, and in honoring him, we honor the best in ourselves." 3 men were convicted of the assassination: Thomas Hagan, who confessed, Muhammad Abdul Aziz, and Khalil Islam. But in 2021, 56 years later, Aziz and Islam's convictions were vacated after investigators discovered that the FBI and NYPD had withheld evidence proving their innocence. 2 innocent men had spent decades in prison for a crime they didn't commit, while the actual conspirators and the possibility of government involvement remained obscured. The legacy of El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz is complex and contested. To some, he remains a controversial figure who preached confrontation. To others, he's a prophetic voice who refused to compromise human dignity for the comfort of oppressors. But what's undeniable is his transformation. From Malcolm Little, the boy whose home was burned and whose father was killed, to Detroit Red, the hustler surviving in an economy that excluded him, to Malcolm X, the minister who gave voice to black rage and pride, to El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz, the Muslim who embraced the universal brotherhood of Islam. He showed that human beings aren't imprisoned by their past, that intellectual and spiritual transformation is always possible, that principles matter more than popularity, and that the pursuit of justice sometimes costs everything. In one of his final speeches, he said, I believe in the brotherhood of man, all men, but I don't believe in brotherhood with anybody who doesn't want brotherhood with me. I believe in treating people right, but I'm not going to waste my time trying to treat somebody right who doesn't know how to return the treatment. El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz died fighting for a world where people of color could live as fully human. His pilgrimage to Mecca taught him that racism wasn't inevitable, that human brotherhood was possible, that the injustice of white supremacy could be overcome if people had the courage to confront it. That's an indelible mark worth remembering. If this gave you a new perspective on Islamic history and the global Muslim community, subscribe to Muslim Biographies. We uncover the forgotten giants whose contributions shaped our world, because history has the answers if you know where to look.